ألا بذكرك قلبي يطمئن ألا بذكرك قلبي يطمئن وهل بغير ذكرك قلب المرء.
So now I'd like to thank Dr. Bowles for joining us. We really appreciate you being with us today. I want to introduce everyone to Dr. Bowles and give a little bio, which I hope we have time for because her bio is quite extensive. Okay, so welcome to Dr. Velva Bowles. Dr. Bowles is a physician, a scientist, and a businesswoman. She's currently a resident of Alexandria, Louisiana. Dr. Bowles is a physician scientist who practiced clinical medicine for 25 years in Louisiana, South Carolina, and Missouri, and is certified by the American College of Forensic Examiners as a medical investigator. Her practice of medicine was in the area of pediatrics and emergency and internal medicine. Dr. Bowles earned her bachelor's degree in biology and chemistry from North Carolina State University, master's degree in inorganic and organic chemistry from Duquesne University, doctorate of medicine from University of Pittsburgh, doctorate in health sciences from Concordia University. Dr. Bowles had postgraduate training at Colorado State University in molecular biology, gene manipulation, and medical residency at Tulane Medical Center. Dr. Bowles has been an adjunct professor at LSUA in Department of Mathematics and Physical Sciences and Upper Iowa University in Biology Department. Dr. Bowles is the Chief Technology Officer for Ward Holding International, focusing on industrializing Tanzania agriculture. Also, she is the founder and CEO of DHB Solutions. DHB Solutions provide effective solutions designed and tailored specifically to the needs of small and large in order to achieve their dreams of success by way of vision, revision, and goal alignment. Dr. Bowles is the author of 4 books and several white papers. And last, but probably not least, Dr. Bowles continues to fight against the oppressive nature of medicine as interpreted against African American people, Native people, and other people of color. So this is really a bio. Dr. Bowles has great many have had great many years of experience in research and investigation. We're going to spend some time with us today, helping us to understand this COVID and the vaccines have been manufactured and begun to be distributed to people around the world, not just in this country. So we have already established a few questions that we would like to ask of Dr. Bowles. And if it's okay with her, I will begin with the first question.
Greetings to everyone. Thank you so much for that introduction, and I'm ready when you are.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Bowles. All right, so the first question, we'd like you to talk about the vaccines, the efficacy, safety, and the possible dangers and side effects of the vaccines that have been manufactured.
Well, the way in which I would start in addressing the question is I'd want everybody to understand just what a vaccine is. To answer the questions, it's safe and the efficacy. Let's first say what does or why is the vaccine designed to do? What was it designed to do? And what isn't being expressed well, in my opinion, in mass media and other forms of communication is the vaccine does not protect you against the infection of any kind. The job of a vaccine is to stimulate your body to generate its immunology protection. So I repeat, the vaccine doesn't give you protection. It stimulates your body to generate antibodies. So understanding that a vaccine alone is not the solution. And I've talked to a number of people who say, oh, I need a vaccine. Should I take it? Should I not? What will happen if I take it? if you first understand that it's simply a stimulus. Now, when a vaccine is designed, its intent is introducing a harmless stimulus to make the body react so that when the harmful entity, in this case, a virus, comes to infect you, you already have the immunity. You've already generated your protection. When someone say, well, what do you think of the vaccine? My response is, this vaccine has a lot of first time evers. That for the first time ever, the two vaccine leading in America, which are by Pfizer and Moderna, they start with a messenger RNA as being the particle that they're introducing in your body to stimulate your immunity. That's never been done before. AstraZeneca starts with DNA to stimulate your body to produce antibodies. So the question should come, well, wait a minute, vaccines have been around a long time. What do they usually use to stimulate your body? And the answer is, for polio, measles, mumps, and many other vaccines, they started with a piece of the offending agent. If it was a bacteria, they started with a piece of the bacteria. If it was a virus, they started with a piece of the virus. Or they were made sure the bacteria was dead and they introduced particles of the dead bacteria, meaning the body reacted the same way it would if that living entity had infected, meaning if the bacteria infected, your body will launch your immune response. In this case, there's several steps in between the purpose of a vaccine and what the body can do. When they introduce messenger RNA, your body has to take the messenger RNA and through a system already in your system, the ribosome will translate that foreign messenger RNA and produce a particle, a protein particle, which is usually made by the virus. And with that particle of foreign protein in your body, you can launch your immune response. So some of the discussion is, how do we know that something won't go wrong when they're introducing messenger RNA into your body? Messenger RNA is a type of genetic material. Most of us have heard the term DNA because they've incorporated that in all these criminal shows on how they catch the bad guy. Well, the body also has genetic information known as RNA. And both Pfizer and Moderna is using messenger RNA as their vehicle of stimulating your immunity. So understanding that vaccines stimulate, and that's the key. I think everybody needs to catch that verbiage. Everyone who is stimulated may not respond, and nobody's talking about that. When the virus first came out, people were dying disproportionately. The elderly, people with comorbidities, autoimmune diseases, or compromised health systems were unable to launch sufficient immunity against the virus, and the virus infected, overcame that person, and that person died or was badly maimed or injured. The thing no one's saying anything about is, if you give a vaccine to someone who cannot launch an immune response, the vaccine is useless, because vaccine gives no protection. It simply stimulates a response. So if you cannot provide that response for whatever the reason, the vaccine does nothing to help you not succumb to the infection of COVID-19. So the question of how effective do you think the vaccine is going to be, I'd have to ask, what is the population that you are administering vaccines to? Of course, in America, they said they're going to start with people over the age of 60. And I shook my head saying, people over the age of 60 are the ones who would have a sluggish immune system. So giving them the vaccine first implies you're giving them a protection. And I argue you can give them the vaccine first, but their response is based not on the vaccine, but on their ability to respond. Did I answer the question, or should I continue?
No, I mean, I think you did. However, in light of all that you've said so far, is there any safety issues that people need to be concerned about, and are there any dangers as well? Because it sounds like the safety could be an issue if especially if you're injecting the vaccine into people over 60. And how would that apply to people who are actually under 60?
Well, the vaccines are not approved for anyone under the age of 16, and there's a reason for that. I can talk to that in a minute. But to answer the initial question, the real, what can I say, scientific concern, and I step away from the clinical table to speak scientifically. When you design a vaccine, you do a pathway. You say, I'm going to give the injection, and it should take 7 to 10 days if the body is going to respond. And if it's going to respond the way we intend, they should start generating antibodies. The thing that the public may not know is the body can respond in more than one way. It doesn't have to start generating antibodies. It can start with a cellular response. And what the short history for COVID-19 has shown us, in February of 2020, when there were 76% of the deaths in New Orleans were Black people, 68% of the people in Detroit dying were Black people. And there was a question, why are all these Black people dying? Now, although they haven't come out and said it forthright, at least Fauci hasn't, I haven't heard CDC or others say it, this virus does not always go to the lung first. Among the Chinese, the first symptoms was a cough and a fever and muscle ache. Among the Italians, it appeared to have the same presentation, cough, fever, muscle ache. So the world began to say only people who have a cough and fever and myalgias will be tested. Well, guess what, folks? African Americans did not present with a cough and a fever. They presented with stomach pain, diarrhea, severe fatigue, loss of appetite. And when they, in an equally emergency state, presented to the ERs or to their primary doctors, they were told, nope, you can't get tested because you don't have a cough and you don't have a fever. Well, now, I guess they started reporting this in late May and early June. This virus doesn't act like influenza. It doesn't act like the common cold. It does not only attach itself to mucous membranes, which is the nose, the throat, and the lung lining. For people who have a receptor called ACE2, ACE-2, this virus seeks that receptor preferentially. Therefore, wherever you have the most ACE2 receptors is where this virus predominates. It appears that Americans of African descent had the proportionally high ACE2 receptors in the stomach and intestinal areas. What they later, now as late as August and September, started to see that children, when they got sick, their complaints were more vascular. And children who had severe COVID-19 infections ended up with amputations and heart attacks and strokes. So if those who follow CNN or their TV, you notice they stop emphasizing cough and fever and muscle aches, because that is not the only set of symptoms that are early indications for COVID-19. So to answer your question, when they give the vaccine, they are expecting traditional response. There has never been anything like this. COVID-19, they can't say it behaves like influenza, or it behaves like the measles, or it doesn't behave like any of its precursors. It is a viral infection, but it's not acting like a virus as we know it. So when they're giving the vaccine, you can predict what you want to happen, but they can't predict what will actually happen. So you get the vaccine, hopefully you form your antibodies and you are immune to the virus. But the kinds of things that they minimize us talking about are the following. The vaccines that they're now circulating and injecting was designed against what they're now calling the original SARS-2 COVID-19. I hope if you've been following the news, you know that there are 2 other strains that are virulent. Now, what that means is the virus mutates, and there are a number of mutations we don't worry about, but there are 2 that we are worried about. One of them predominated in the UK, and the other was in South Africa. Well, since they know of these 2 more virulent, let me tell you, virulent means easier to infect you. That in the original virus, just for comparison, let's say it took 100 viral particles for you to get infected, meaning I sneeze in my hand, I shake your hand, or I'm singing in church and I'm singing real loud and I'm just sprinkling my spittle on the back of your neck. Then you get infected. This new virus, you don't have to be close to the person. If they spend more than 15 minutes in the room where you are talking, just normal talking, or if you do cough or sneeze and touch the corner of a desk at an office, and the person who usually stays in that office brushes the corner of the desk, that may be enough to get infected. So that's what virulence means. It's more easily spread. Well, the South American virus, that strain, is now in America. They have identified in Colorado and California, in Florida, and I'm sure other states since I last checked the books. The concern is the vaccine they're now giving, will it stimulate a response in you that will protect you from the strain that is now present in the United States? The answers are mixed. There are some scientists saying no. The present vaccine will not stimulate a response in you that will protect you against this new, more virulent COVID-19. But no one's discussing this openly. No one's giving people a chance to weigh in on it. It is mandatory vaccine, absolutely, if you're frontline and you're a teacher and you're over 60. And I think that in that pressuring tactics, they are alienating some people to wanting the vaccine at all. And people such as myself, I feel frustrated that you're not getting the whole story. Vaccination is not the only way to protect you from COVID-19.
Well, you're leading us to the next question. My second question was about the mutations. And now you're talking about, alternative treatments. And that's one of the things I think we would like to hear about, because I've been hearing different things myself, through the media. And so I'm, very curious to know, what your take is on the possible alternatives that should be available, but that maybe are not.
Well, I like to lay the foundation so all of my listeners will be together with me when I deep dive. When we talk about alternatives, let me explain as a scientist now. Again, I'm not being the physician who says, come take your vaccination. I'm going to talk to you from a scientist point of view. If you look at a problem, and this being in healthcare, you can dissect that problem in many parts. In the case of COVID-19, one question can say, can we stop this virus by immunization? That's one attack. You can ask, can we stop this virus by interrupting the process of infection? And we'll talk a little bit more about that. And the third is, can we simply protect the person from the virus for a short period of time? Now, when we talk about immunization, that is an action item. We are busy finding out, what does the virus look like? Can I make some kind of injectable vehicle to stimulate the body to fight it? And that's where the warp speed kind of attitude went 100% in the United States. The can we interrupt the process? You heard a lot about the hydrochloroquine, and then there's ivermectin, and then there's alpha interferon, a number of drugs which persons have said something, and all of a sudden you hear CDC and other groups saying, no, 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 no. Let me explain why that even came up. When we talk about an infection, that is something that shouldn't be there, stimulates your immune system. That's all it means. Infection can be a bacteria, it can be a parasite, it can be a virus. It is something that invaded your system and stimulated your immune. So the process that stimulates your immune system is quite separate from the inflammation or the immune response itself. So as a scientist, we can choose to say, can we interrupt the immune response? And the answer is we do it all the time. When a child has an asthmatic attack, we don't care what caused the asthma, whether dog allergy, hay fever, dust. All we do is we give you steroids or we give you epinephrine. So that's proof that the treatment is interrupting the process. Didn't ask you what caused it. We're just going to stop the immune response. If you have an autoimmune disease such as lupus or MS, we don't necessarily know. I think most of the physicians will say unknown cause. But when we give you medicine, what we're doing is stopping the immune response. So in the early days of COVID-19, a number of scientists says, okay, why don't we look at the different drugs that we already use to stop the immune response and see if we can save some lives for people who have a severe COVID response. So naturally, steroids were tried. Plaquenil was tried. Ivermectin was tried. Hydrochloride was tried. So, and I'm sure there's many I don't know. Alpha interferon was tried. And some of them marginally would be affected because keep in mind, the intent is to interrupt that immune response, which in the case of severe COVID infection, proved to be fatal. It caused the lungs to close down and the person needed respiratory support. So if you are looking at why did that come on the scene? Why did they have these drugs and then suddenly say they don't work? Some people brag about it and say it did work. My answer is all of that is true. I'm sure there are some persons who, when they took any kind of process disruptive medication, it slowed down or stopped that immune response, which in effect was making them so sick. So if you're looking at how are you trying to treat COVID, you have to look at it in parts. The last part I wanted to address was, can we passively protect someone? Now, when we talk about vaccine and we talked about infection, those are what we call active immunity. Your body is stimulated, your body generates antibodies. But since 1901, when a doctor was awarded a Nobel Prize for demonstrating conclusively passive immunity, I have no idea, no explanation, no understanding of why these United States did not also pursue a parallel development of passive immunity antibodies. Now, I know Mayo Clinic and FDA started looking at things back in late January 2020. They were referring to convalescent antibodies, which specifically meant if you had the COVID-19 infection, then I collect your blood and isolate the antibodies that you made. Now, that's called convalescent antibodies. but the lab can, through processes we have well perfected, make what we refer to as monoclonal antibodies. We can even have heteroclonal antibodies. And the proof of its availability is in the treatment of Donald Trump. It was announced he was positive. Within 2 days, he went to Walter Reed. They administered Regeneron passive antibodies, and 3 days later, he walked around saying he was no longer positive. Some say he was never sick. My answer is, yeah, he probably was positive. He didn't wear a mask. He shook hands. He went into groups. He and other people around him got infected. The difference is treatment. They didn't experiment with him. They didn't give him steroids. They didn't give him a whole lot of other stuff. They gave them Remeron, which is a pharmaceutical company, multivalent antibodies. And my question is, why is that not an alternative option for people on the front line? And by all means, why is passive immunity not a preferred attack of this virus for the elderly? If you have an 80-year-old with compromised kidneys, with poor digestion and other comorbidities, perhaps diabetes or hypertension, now you're going to inject a foreign body in their body and say, okay, I'm waiting to see if their body will mount an immune response to protect them against COVID-19. All of that seems foolish in the face of modern medicine and known scientific methods. It would have made so much more sense, in my opinion, this is totally personal, if we had, with our warp speed, generated passive immunity, immunoglobulins, call it what you want, serums, monoclonal antibodies, and given our elderly who are in the nursing home, not bothering anybody, not spreading anything, and conveyed this passive immunity on them so that Christmas would have been a happy time. People can come and kiss them and hug them and say hello and not be giving them the risk of dying from a disease. And scientific community can't say we don't already know this. I don't have an answer. Someone said, well, Dr. Bowles, why wasn't passive immunity a choice? Or some would say, I'm not sure I know what you're talking about. What is passive immunity? My answer is, consider breastfeeding. When a mother gives birth to a child and she allows the child to nurse within the first few hours of birth, she is passing passive immunity to that child. A mother makes a fluid called colostrum. And as that baby feeds on colostrum, because she's not giving them milk within the first hours, that baby's body is acquiring the immunities that the mother has, because the antibodies that the mother already makes is being passed to that child through breast milk or colostrum. So we know this, we observe it in nature, but we have taken no alternative effort to do the same. So when I hear talking about mandatory vaccination and your job depends on it, I'm saying, give me my alternative. If you are going to say that a nurse that's working in ICU or an emergency care nurse or a school teacher or anyone, someone who collects the trash, someone who is mandated, what is it, essential worker, if I must be exposed, if that is what you are mandating me to be, then protect me. And if I have diabetes or hypertension or any comorbidity where your vaccine puts me at added risk by your injecting something in my body that you cannot say will give you the desired response, give me an alternative. Give me mother's milk equivalents. Give me passive immunity. You know how to make the product. It's as easy, if not easier, than making a vaccine. I know handling messenger RNA is difficult. I've tried that in the lab. And the reason they have to transport it at such low temperatures is that the messenger RNA is not very stable. So I call out to the scientists and the medical community and say, why are we doing a single option when there's many at hand? There was a lot of noise when Donald Trump talked about hydrochloroquine and it got hushed up. There's been a very good data of ivermectin, and that has been seemingly trying to be hushed up. And then the alternative of passive immunity through monoclonal antibodies or heteroclonal antibodies, and no one's even saying anything. However, they use that approach with Donald Trump.
Well, I understand that I've been hearing about side effects. Since people have actually taken the vaccine, people have had certain reactions. And I was wondering if you can speak to that, because I know a lot of people saying, I don't want to take the vaccine because I don't know what's going to happen to me. Will I have a side effect? Will I have a reaction to it? Will something happen to me 5 to 10 years from now as a result of taking this vaccine? So from the knowledge that you have of studying and investigating this process they've been going through with establishing this vaccine, what do you think of the possibility of side effects, and what could those side effects be?
Well, the most frightening thing for me when they start talking about this mass vaccination, it's the biggest experiment known to mankind, is what I have been quoted and will stand behind. Because the use of vaccine that has messenger RNA or the vaccine that has DNA, no one can tell you, is there a long-term consequence? They can tell you what they expect. They can tell you their intent, but it hasn't been studied long enough for there to be data to prove any of what they're saying. One of the issues or the explanation I was giving when they kept lauding things like 94% effective, 96, and people saying, well, there's a guarantee. I said, well, let me ask you this question. Let me give you a little paradigm. Here's what I want you to think about. You've just arrived home and your house is locked up. You can't get inside. Well, you can take a stone and break a window and get inside. Breaking your window is 100% effective for you getting inside. Or you can take your key out of your pocket, unlock your door, and get inside. And you can say that's 100% effective that you got inside. Now let's look at how efficient your two methods are. Where you broke your window, you now have a secondary problem. You can't pick the glass back up and put it in the pane. You can't stop anything else coming in your house. So you now may have been effective in entering, but the efficiency is poor. But you can walk over to your door, shut it and lock it, and it is as safe as it ever was. So your efficiency of using your key to come through the door is as good as it ever can be. Now, how do I extrapolate that? When you hear the pharmaceutical companies bragging about effectiveness, they are not even addressing outcome or potential harm. I can brag that breaking a window with a stone and unlocking a door with a key are equally effective. And I don't think anybody would argue with me. And if that's all I said, you could go away believing that putting a stone through a window and unlocking your door are the same. But I hope you see it is not. And the only way you can evaluate the efficiency is to observe what happens when you do it. Usually in vaccinations, they go through a series of levels. They may start with a petri dish and look and see if they do this and do that, does the cells that's growing on a petri dish, does it die? Then they may move to a rat or a mouse. Then it may move to a monkey. Then it may move to healthy kids or young people. Usually it's college kids, they pay them $3,000 or $4,000, and this healthy person comes and they observe this healthy person for 6 months, 9 months to a year. And then they publish that this is what we found out looking at these steps. With warp speed, all of these let's see what would happen observations had no time to be done. They don't know what will happen in 6 or 9 months because they haven't watched anybody that long. And not only that, they're going to people who have comorbidities when normally testing of a vaccine are in very healthy people only initially. So when I say this is the greatest experiments known to mankind, is if a messenger RNA vaccine also stimulates some process in the body unexpectedly, we won't know until maybe this time next year or this time 5 years from now. So the focus has been very single-minded. How effective can we stop the infection of COVID-19? And I think that violates the tenets of medicine, do no harm. That the chance of someone contracting COVID-19 and recovering, if it is no worse than an injection in my body that 5 years from now, I have some kind of genetic abnormality or some tumor or some mental issue, the things they observe potentially is if the person that takes the vaccine has a response other than producing immunoglobulins, what could that response be? Well, if I had a cytoplastic response, which means killer cells and other type of T cells and responded, because immunoglobulins, we have something the body would call B cells. B cells make your immunoglobulins, but we have a whole lot of other immunocells. We have T cells and killer cells and macrophages and quite a number. Eosinophils can react in an allergy situation. They mentioned that there were a few people who showed an anaphylactoid response, and that's sort of been hushed up. But what anaphylactoid response means is that the body reacted to the vaccine itself in a way that is allergic. For people who have bee sting allergies or peanut allergies, their airway closes, they can't breathe, they turn red, they get a rash. Many people will pass out, and it can be fatal, particularly if the soft tissue in the trachea swells. And the way they hushed it up, they said, after vaccine, if someone has an anaphylactoid response, it will be in an environment where it can be immediately reacted to, and we know how to treat it. And my reaction when I was on a webinar hearing this is, okay, as a Black slave descendant person in these United States, a country that will not respond to a Black person's complaint to the tune of 78% of the people died in New Orleans. You're going to comfort me to say that if I have an anaphylactoid response to your vaccine, I will be first attended to properly, second, rushed to an environment to be attended to properly, and third, taken seriously. And no one could respond to that. Now we say, who will have the anaphylactoid response? Here's what the warning is. If you have any known allergies, hay fever, asthma, COPD, skin irritations, that you should avoid the vaccine. And I chuckle because I don't know that that caveat or that warning has been universal. I've seen all kinds of commercials about take the vaccine, protect yourself and your neighbor, but no one is saying, oh, but by the way, if you have hay fever or asthma or COPD, these conditions make it more likely that you can have an anaphylactoid response to the vaccine. So when I speak, I'm saying, why are we giving these bits and pieces? Why not give the whole story? Talk about vaccines. They said, Dr. Bowles, do you recommend or not? I said, vaccines has a purpose. The medicines that interrupt inflammatory processes, that has purpose. The monoclonal or heterozygous clonal immunoglobulins, they have a purpose. So why is it so focused in one direction? Why are they talking about mandatory vaccine I'm saying that's not necessary. It's mean-spirited, it's pejorious, and it's also incorrect. If a person cannot mount an immune response, vaccinating that person is useless. Vaccines do not protect you.
For the people who choose not to take the vaccine for whatever reasons that they have, what advice would you give them in terms of protecting themselves, or what do you think maybe the prognosis could be for a person who decides not to take the vaccine? What is your take on that?
Well, I have, I guess, a community of people who actually followed several things. I started back in late January, early February, expressing my concerns. And for those who took that position, said, okay, Dr. Bowles, here's your situation. What do you recommend? And here's my recommendation. Stay away from crowds. Avoid public places, because there are malicious people out there. I have seen someone sneeze in their hand and reach and pick up a jar of peanut butter. To me, that's intentional spread, and they have malicious intent. So if you stay out of public places, then you are avoiding someone else's malice. If you must go out, cover your nose and your face, because the COVID-19 is generally transmitted by inhaling, or you can touch something, rub your eye, and transmit it through the mucous membranes of your eye. You can touch a doorknob and rub the corner of your mouth. And again, that's considered mucous membrane. So you want to be aware anytime in a public situation what you're touching. If you saw what was televised in places like China and Korea, they were out foaming or steaming. It appeared they were steaming sidewalks and buildings and so forth. I never saw America follow suit. However, I went to the dentist, I think, several months ago, and he's an orthodontist, and people have their mouth open for whatever, half an hour, while he's doing work. And I asked him, how is it you feel confident working with people who are exhaling and breathing, mouth open in a room, and COVID-19 is contagious in that manner? And here's what he told me, and this has to be 8 months ago. He said, I found out there was a process being done in Korea where they release a fog. And this fog, like Lysol spray, and I guess they got a whole bunch of antiseptic sprays, can capture or precipitate aerosols of virus out of the air. And if you fog the room, I think he said 3 to 5 minutes, there's a 99% chance that there's no virus left in that room. So he's very comfortable having his orthodontic patients come in to do surgery and actually spend that time with them. And I'm saying, if there's such a fog that exists and you're able to purchase and install it, why isn't that installed in schools? Why isn't that installed in nursing homes? His office is in Louisiana. So the technology exists. The ability to actually sanitize an area safely exists. In some of the operating rooms, even back in my medical school days, and that's decades ago, they were using ultraviolet light. That whenever the room was vacant, they put ultraviolet lights on, and it is known that ultraviolet light can neutralize viruses and bacteria. So my question is, why aren't we using that technology? Why are we telling a teacher she has to use a spray pump and take a paper towel and wipe a desk down? Why aren't we protecting our children better than that? When children are catching a bus, how many buses have ever been fogged or wiped out? They say, take a spray pump and wipe it down. Why are we using labor-intensive, non-mechanized processes when we know that it's life-threatening? This is the United States. We claim to be, at the top of the mountain, but our behavior belies us. I don't understand why we are taking the very non-industrialized approach to very life-threatening real threats. So to answer the rest of your question, make sure you are spraying the pillows in your house with Lysol or some kind of antiseptic that can decrease the concentration. Pillows are bad because if you lay down, if you're feeling ill and you go to sleep and you're breathing in and out of the pillow, many of us get up and make the bed. We don't think so much about what is the concentration of what's left behind on the pillowcase. My mother had an expression that she would get someone up off of their sick bed and change the sheets. I can really remember having a head cold or something and feeling miserable and having my mom rouse me because she was going to clean the bed, change the sheets. So in answer to the question, make sure that you are pulling pillowcases off or double pillowcase covering, taking the outer one off and washing it frequently in hot water with the appropriate cleansing material, not necessarily bleach, but certainly detergents. Wash your hands frequently. That is very important. And what can you do orally? Vitamin D for Black people is imperative. When I was very active in my clinic, every Black female over the age of 30 that either had a problem with obesity or she thought she had her hair wouldn't grow or her skin was real dry or she was sluggish, when I evaluated her vitamin D level, it was very, very low. And there is a reason for it. Many dark complexioned people do not absorb the sun rays as much as someone who is lighter. And consequently, the kidney, which generates vitamin D in our body, does not make vitamin D efficiently. So women, if you're near menopause or in menopause, or you know you're working inside of the building, you don't go out to garden, you're not outside more than a half hour a day, it is very likely your vitamin D3 is low. And you must have vitamin D3 in your body to respond to any kind of immune stimulus. So in other words, without vitamin D3, your ability to fight any kind of infection is very low. And the likelihood of your responding efficiently to the vaccine is very low. So vitamin D3 is very important. Zinc has been found to prevent viruses from attaching. And you would say, what does that mean? If you see the picture of COVID-19, it has all these little stickers on the outside, the proteins that stick out, looks like a crown or barbed wire, however you want to think about it. Well, these stickers, if you like, attaches itself to a receptor. And a receptor, if you were trying to say, well, what does that mean? If you have an electric plug and you plug it in the wall, we say you're plugging it into the receptor. Well, imagine the virus the same way. Those little sticky prongs are like the plug on your iron. And when it gets to where it thinks it ought to be, like inside your nose or inside your mouth, it'll plug in to a receptor, just like you plug that plug into a wall receptor. When you take zinc, zinc blocks those plug-ins. So if you've ever traveled, I know that when I did a lot more airplane flying, I used to buy a lounger that said it contained zinc. So just like a breath mint or a cough drop, I would put that lounger in my mouth before I went to the airport, actually, and I would actually eat those or suck on it during the entire trip because I wanted to block the receptors that any kind of virus might look for while I was outside of an environment where my body had immunity to. So any kind of zinc, they make zinc lozenges. Some people supplement zinc itself orally. I don't advocate vitamins so much because pharmaceutical companies isolate a particular nutrient. And when you take that vitamin outside of its normal environment, it can do harm. If you eat an apple, you're getting vitamin A and vitamin E, you're getting some fibers, you're getting some sugars. But if you go and get only apple pectin and you take it as a peel, you don't have the same mix of needed nutrients that the apple itself has. So whenever possible, I say eat foods. So the question came, okay, Dr. Bowles, what kind of foods? I recommend, and I smiled because I told my sister, I said, it's really a poor man's diet. Sardines are very nutritious in the face of anti-infection. It provides zinc and selenium and a number of nutrients that many of us modern Americans don't have in our diet. When I grew up in North Carolina and we had a garden, we had a lot of root vegetables. You would look at turnips and carrots and beets and onions. And my dad, because he was a primary person tending the garden, knew what nutrients was in his soil. He would look and say, we need to put some earthworm in the soil, or he'd say, we need to put some lime in that soil. So consequently, the root vegetables gave us these minerals and these vitamins. Today, when you go to your local box store, you're getting something from Mexico or Honduras, and it was picked well before it was ripened. And although it may look like the apple, the orange, the tomato, or whatever sweet potato that you once knew, if you did a nutrient profile, it won't contain the same level of nutrients that your parents would have gotten from a garden. So be careful what you're eating. If you're eating a lot of fast foods or fried foods, you are actually disarming, and I mean the word disarm, like your ability to fight becomes less because you do not have the starting materials required to launch an immune defense. So in the announcement of saying people with comorbidities are more likely to succumb to COVID-19, I'm going to put a tail on that and say people with comorbidities are less likely to benefit from the vaccine.
Would you say a person who contracted COVID and actually recovered from it, would you advise them with the same protocol that you mentioned for those to protect themselves even after they've had it? Should they follow the same protocols in order to maintain their health?
Yes. As I was going to say, I didn't wait for you to finish. Just because you had COVID-19 and you might have been deathly ill, and now they've told you they cannot measure the virus when they do sampling, you are not immune to all other COVID-19 strains that are now prevalent. I can't emphasize that enough. You do not have an invisible shield. There has even been indications of a person who had documented COVID-19 in February was tested positive a second time in July. And the second infection was more aggressive for this person than the first. So please do not get lulled into a complacency that, oh, I've had my vaccine. Please, if nothing else, take from this presentation, vaccines do not protect you. Vaccines stimulate the person's own body to generate immunity. If the person's ability to generate immunity is compromised for whatever reason, the vaccine will not protect you. And I think that in good conscience, we should be offering passive immunity alternative to those persons. Just like they can generate all of these vials out of Pfizer and Moderna and AstraZeneca and whatever other companies, why don't we have an equal manufacturing theory to generate passive immunity for those who cannot benefit from the vaccine?
Okay, thank you, Dr. Bowles, so much for all of that, all of those lectures, all that information. I mean, it just seems like there's so much more to discuss, but I know, because of time constraints, we can't do that. And we did promise to have a Q&A, after, our discussion today. So I like the host who's handling the Q&A to begin that. We're going to have some people may ask directly by way of mic. Some may be asking questions by way of chat. So we're going to go ahead and get that started. And because like I said, we have time constraints. And maybe at some point, if people are interested in learning more, and if you're free, maybe at some point we can have you come back again to do another session, because there's just so much that we need to know and understand. There's so much out there and so much confusion. We need to have clarity about this situation. So anyway, we like to begin with the Q&A. So who,
Okay.
Claudine, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, good afternoon, Dr. Bowles. Thank you so much for that enlightening, powerful offering and lecture. I can't say enough about that. There's a question online here. Greetings, assalamu alaikum to all. I have a dear friend that just succumbed to COVID. I understand that he had an underlying respiratory condition called Valley virus, which he contracted in California. And the person saying, I realized he had a chronic acute cough before his last hospitalization, but he ended up with blood clots in his lungs. Would this be considered the last step before a ventilator? And what are the chances of recovery from either?
Wow. When I first mentioned that anyone who has comorbidities, you heard me say asthma, COPD, they're even throwing in heavy smokers. We should also include anyone who has a known pre-existing respiratory condition. Valley fever or other kinds of pulmonary infections will be a compromising situation. This virus looks for the receptor ACE2. Now, if ACE2 is deep in the lungs, when I went to a seminar, a webinar earlier this week, they were saying that the COVID-19 actually presents in two different ways. That's not talked about widely, but one way is the upper respiratory. And that's when they put the nasal swab in and they tell you you're positive, and that's kind of a rapid test. The other one is deep alveolar pulmonary infection, and that requires a PCR analysis, and oftentimes they have you cough up or spit because they really want deep excretions from the lungs. It sounds like from that description, there was a pre-existing condition where the lungs were less than healthy. And in such a setting, this virus would be atrocious. It would have a much easier entry in the lower bronchial or respiratory tract. And as I mentioned, in children who are basically healthy, this virus tends to like the lining of vessels, and it has a predilection to blood clot formation. And from this descriptive, it would seem that COVID-19 took advantage of this easy avenue into the lower part of the lung, and it has manifest its havoc along the vascular linings, whether just in the lung or maybe systemically, I wouldn't know, but the consequence are blood clots. The most aggressive COVID-19 in children wasn't always death. The most aggressiveness in children was stroke and blood clots in the lower leg that required amputation, and blood clots in the lungs that resulted in pulmonary emboli, and blood clots in the heart. So to answer the question, I am so sorry to hear your friend is fighting and struggling, and I certainly send nothing but best wishes for his triumph. But to answer the question, yes, any pre-existing pulmonary injury would provide COVID-19 a much easier roadmap to wreak havoc, including vasculitis. And that would be one of the reasons blood clots are formed.
Thank you so much. We got another couple of questions. The questioner asks, I had to join late. They're saying, so they apologize. Could you please explain more about the monoclonal antibody treatment?
Well, I'm invite all of us to go back to school. 1901, there was Nobel Prize was given in medicine for a physician who was able to scientifically demonstrate that you could have immunity bestowed on you without having ever had the infection. It's a very nice history read. Science history, I think, should be something all of our children are oriented to. So when you hear something, you don't get fooled. What I'm saying with passive immunity, again, say the best example is mother's breast milk, that Mother Nature took care of her business. When a new baby is born, the mother, who is the birthing mother, gets a fluid secreted through her breast that is not milk. It's called colostrum. And believe it or not, we actually collect colostrum from the bovine and sheep and goat families. And that colostrum is used as passive immunity in less industrialized countries. So the understanding of colostrum bestowing passive immunity is well known for over 120 years plus. So my comment was the labs can generate antibodies. We know how. We have all kinds of techniques. We can do yeast and make it. We can use, different kind of animals. We inoculate them and then collect it. So we have methods of generating what is best known as monoclonal antibodies. Back in the 70s, it was referred to as immunoglobulin treatment. I took immunoglobulin treatment as a much, much younger woman. When I was traveling to Africa, I was going not through Peace Corps, but as an employee of the Ministry of Education. And they wanted to be particularly careful about the young Americans who had never experienced whatever we were going into. So they gave us immunoglobulin shots. And you say, what for? They were giving us passive immunity to some known infections in the area we were traveling. So the answer to the question, it is a generated precaution. It lasts in the body roughly 3 months, and it gives you protection against a known offender. And it's called passive immunity. And your best example is mother's milk. And yes, laboratories and pharmaceutical companies know how to make it.
Oh, thank you. Another question, what are the patient's rights? This is towards a legal slant. What are the patient's rights if there is a comorbidity? Can such a patient opt for one of the alternative remedies? Or are we at the discretion of our employers or the government who are offering, or the government who is offering the vaccine?
This is someone who must have sat with tea with me. My biggest objection, frustration, aggravation is that there are no alternatives offered. And yes, I've made some phone calls to some of my legal friends and said there should be an ACLU or some kind of NAACP or some action taken against this establishment. Now, Joe Biden has just come to office. He's not sworn in yet. He has appointed his COVID-19 person. I have advocated that there be a special group, and I volunteered to be among that special group, advising this administration on how to adequately address the needs of slave descendant Black Americans. And I put the slave descendant because I am not talking about dark-skinned people in general, meaning people from India or people from the continent of Africa within the last generation. I'm talking about those of us who have a disproportionate level of stressors, who suffer a disproportionate level of diabetes, hypertension, asthma, COPD, and other comorbidities. And my advocacy is just that we be given these options in an open, supportive manner, that we don't have to go to some private physician, some secret clinic, or have some fear of going to a Tuskegee experiment like they did for the syphilis experiment. We need to have an open discussion, and these alternatives that's been discussed today should be offered. I should, if I have diabetes or hypertension, say I am afraid of COVID-19, but I'm also afraid of your vaccine. I would like to receive monoclonal antibody passive immunity, and then it be revisited in April or May. Meaning you check me, if I'm still healthy and well and COVID-19 infection is still raging, give me another immunoglobulin boost. That should be an option in my opinion. And just like the vaccine got fast paced to be brought to the people, there should be an equal effort to give those who have the potential for anaphylactoid reaction, those who have the potential for a sluggish immune response, to receive passive immunity, because their right to, if you ask about patients' right, we have the what? A right to life. That's, I think I have a right to life. If there is a method by which you can protect me, not just stimulate my immune system, but protect me, then do so.
Thank you. That's great. For persons who may have contracted the COVID and gotten over it, quote unquote, and have lingering symptoms, what would you, do you have a suggestion for those persons?
Right now at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York, they have over 10,000 patients. When I said COVID-19, the scientifically called SARS-2, is not behaving like any virus we have seen that has come before it. There has been some saying this virus behaves a lot more like cancer. And you would say, what? That's confusing. For those of you who don't know, cervical cancer is caused by a virus. The virus is human papillomavirus. And women, those of you, or those of us, I won't be exclusionary, who have gone through Pap tests, why they were doing Pap tests. They were swabbing to see the presence of that virus. So we know viruses can trigger a cancer-like syndrome or cancer-like behavior in the body. People who have long haulers, as they're calling them, some have shown mental defect like Alzheimer's, where they can't come up with a name or a word. Mm-hmm. Some have had poor attention span, where they can't have a conversation fluently. Others say they fatigue very easily. And the surprising is the more healthy, active, middle-aged people, like those who ran marathons and so forth, are now suffering fatigue just climbing steps. They complain of when they sleep and get up, they don't feel rested. So exactly. Mount Sinai is in the process now of trying to characterize if there is a lingering amount of virus hidden somewhere in the body, say along the meninges of the brain. We do know viruses can do that. If anyone's had a fever blister, that's a herpes virus. And that lesion can go away and come back 10 years from now. So we know viruses, or look at chicken pox. You can have chicken pox, and then as you get old, you can have shingles. So we know viruses can hide in the body. And there's speculation that for some people, COVID-19 may no longer be measurable by swabs or spit, because they are in fact integrated somewhere along your muscles or nerves, and they are still exerting those symptoms without our not knowing yet how to detect that level of viral presence. So long haulers is what you're describing. If you want more in-depth information, Mount Sinai University Hospital in New York have identified, the last meeting that I was a part of said 10,000 people are now registered, and they have accepted or given them the diagnosis of long haulers from COVID-19. Now I know Britain also has quite a number of people at Oxford is studying that they're calling long haulers. So if you're a Google person, Google long haulers and they'll give you some background, but your answer to the question I know you're listening for, do we have a treatment? We do not. They're still defining all the properties that long haulers have.
Thank you so much. There's another question here. What about the number of deaths? Is it, they're asking for your opinion. What about the number of deaths? Do you think it is exaggerated? And another one, a brief question, is any other country offering passive immunity? Passive immunity options, I guess that's what that means.
The first answer is yes, I think the deaths are real, and I think it's underreported. I say that, and I kind of feel emotionally sad. There are people who have power that believe that the earth is overpopulated. I don't know the exact numbers, but I know it was in excess of 8 billion people last time that I was even keeping up in 2018. So if you are a historian of ecology or anthropology, they say the only way in which human population is culled or decreased is by war and by plague. And there were a number of scholars writing that we in modern day were overdue for plague. And some of these writings are saying is conspiratorially, is this intentional? Are they now exercising one of the ways to decrease our population? When you see an industrialized country such as the United States moving so sluggishly and moving so incompletely and looking at over 300,000 deaths, more deaths than occurred in the Vietnam War, more deaths than occurred in both the First and Second World War. One has to pause and say, is the lack of action intentional? And I don't have the answer to that question, but it grieves me to think that there could be someone with such calculating and callousness to say that someone's grandmother, wife, and so forth can die because there's too many people on this earth. So that's more of the conspiracy theorists, as they would say, but evidence is mounting that more could be done to stop this. My greater fear is if you see this kind of die-off in this industrialized country, what will happen when this virus starts to havoc remote, unindustrialized areas? That may very well be the plan. That could be why they're not stemming it where they could. If you say, why don't they have passive immunity? They don't want to introduce it because it would stop it too soon.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I haven't. Some of the persons that you may be referring to, I'm not seeing them in line with their sleeves rolled up. You know what I mean? I'm looking, but I haven't seen them, and I've not heard anything about them rolling up their sleeve either.
Have a glimpse. Remeron treated Donald Trump with immunoglobulins. And I would have thought there would have been all kind of ACLU, NAACP, HBCUs, any kind of Black operative saying, wait, I want what he got.
Right.
But you don't hear it. You didn't get that. I mean, and what was interesting to me, and it was very quietly stated, the same day that Pfizer got acceptance for the vaccine, Eli Lilly stepped forward and offered passive immunity for pediatrics treatments. Did you not know that?
No, that's the
now,
first. Now,
Eli Lilly, as an old time company, I remember reason Eli Lilly, when I hear it, I smile, because when I went to University of Pittsburgh Medical School in 1985, they gave all of the first year students stethoscopes. So that was, that's one of the ways when you want to sway opinion is you give someone something free. So I remember in a very benevolent way. You say Eli Lilly and I smile. You say Eli Lilly, I remember them working with insulin when diabetes, that was one of the few treatments that they had for diabetes. Eli Lilly was a leader in making insulin less expensive. I think when it went from bovine insulin, for those of you who don't know, insulin used to be taken from pigs. They didn't tell everybody that. And then they started making insulin in the laboratory. And Eli Lilly was one of the leaders that stepped up to make insulin reasonably priced for diabetics. So Eli Lilly made the same press release about monoclonal antibodies for pediatrics that Pfizer did for vaccine. And I haven't heard anyone that I've talked to say they were aware of that.
Amazing. Disappointing, but amazing. Is there a question? Is there anywhere the average person can obtain passive immunity options? And also a brief question, what is the condition of the Native people with this pandemic, if you know it?
You make me emotional. There was a I don't know what you call it, a webinar, and the group that was being talked about was the Navajo. And I'm very emotional with that, because part of my medical training in community medicine, the University of Pittsburgh made it possible to travel to Tuber City, Arizona. And I lived with both the Navajo and the Hopi tribes. And what I was studying was called fetal alcohol syndrome. And since that time, I have stayed in touch with a number of people, and the reservations do not have the support necessary. Deaths are very high. I've heard no discussions on vaccine availability to the reservations, because I hope many of you know that the reservations are sovereign nations. I think if the number's correct, it's 163 reservations. What that means, the first people were marched to the ends of the earth, into rock and mountains and water edges, and given little swifts of land and said, okay, here's your sovereign nation. So inside these United States, there are more than 100 reservations. And they being United States, has no obligation to support healthcare or other things on these reservations. There's something called Indian Health Service that are predominant over the reservations. So for those native people who move out into the city, you notice I said Navajo, and you heard me say Tuber City. Tuber City, Arizona is, of course, part of America, and there's a number of Navajo people living there, just like Window Rock and other places. So they're not obliged to live on the reservation. And if they live and work off of the reservation, I would suspect that they have the opportunities for vaccination and others, but I have no verifiable information on how the native people are being treated with respect to the COVID-19 vaccines.
Disappointing. Well, thank you. How are, Dr. Bowles, it must be fatiguing. It must be fatiguing. You're standing in the breach, as it were. I mean, there are people online who I've heard too, and have pulled up on YouTube or whatever. But I mean, this is a very selfless, non-reward. I mean, well, it depends on which level of the reward your person's looking at. But how do you sustain your drive and your energy in this direction?
I had a conversation with my father before he died. He was a very stoic, patriotic kind of person. And there was high strata with men versus women. So it was very seldom he and I had these quiet conversations. And I'm so happy. I lost him in 2008. So it's been a while, but it's so fresh. And you made me smile when you said that. We were talking about something. And in the midst of the conversation, I looked at him and I said, you know, I'm glad of the fabric that I'm made of. And believe it or not, that's intimate conversation with my dad, because in his mind, he understood being a textile worker and all kinds of, I would say, hard worker. He did, as they call it today, hustling, bricklayer, lawn service. He worked for textile mills in North Carolina. And when I said that, he smiled and he said, you like the fabric, huh? Meaning, I have his genes, or I have his tenacity. And he heard what I was saying in the language that I knew he would. So answering your question, I'm a lot like water. You know, if you put water under pressure, what happens? Whatever's bearing down will crack. Water is non-compressible.
That's
like
good.
Water.
I like that. Thank you.
So as things get hotter and harder, I'm pushing out further and further. And my appeal, that you've given me the opportunity to say it, is to be part of Biden's program. I wrote a proposal in November, and I was asking that as a consulate, not just me though, but others who have convictions like mine, become part of the fabric of the White House COVID-19 response. The Black American has been ignored in every possible way, and vaccination is not an exception. And if they are sincere in change for the better, then they need representation from those who are in the trenches. I'm not asking for administrative salary. I'm not asking for mediatorial recognition. I'm saying it's time to give voice to a people you've silenced too long.
Amen.
Can you ask her Hakeem's question?
Yeah, I was going to say, no, I don't have, Dr. Hakeem, you have a question you want to pose to Dr. Bowles?
That question about whether there are passive immunity options available to just the average person. Is there any place that we could actually go and receive some of those options?
Well, I think we need to put pressure and demand it. Right now, there has been no, to my knowledge, no provisions made. You hear about these long cars in the parking lot going to Yankee Stadium to get vaccine. There should be equivalent announcements of those who are wanting the alternative where to go and receive it. So we need to put pressure to bear. If it's on our congressmen, if on our mayors, if it's on our councilmen, that option should be made available. It is a technological doable. It is demonstrated. It's already vetted. And no, it's not permanent immunity, but this is a crisis time. And you do what you have to do in a crisis. So giving you 3 months to 6 months of passive immunity is life-saving.
Could I follow that up? Do you think that there's anything that we can do to put pressure on our medical schools at historically Black colleges? I work at Howard, for example, Meharry, Morehouse.
Wait a minute, I gotta write your name down. Let me.
I'm not a doctor, but I'm not an MD, but I do work there.
I'm looking for some of my HBC heroes, and I'm using the word hero not facetiously. Some have asked me, where are others like you? And my comment is, Black doctors, young doctors, they're at a two-edged sword. Because in order to gain any kind of academic or career recognition, many of us are tied to obligation either by student loans or by American Medical Board standard of care requirements, or a desire to try to advance in our particular organizational structure. With those obstacles, you cannot be outspoken. I received recently an email where a doctor was fired at a notable institution. He was a Black male who spoke out against the treatment of Black patients. We do not have the leverage. I don't know. Why can I speak out? I don't punch anybody's clock. I don't work for anybody. I've been contractor or 1099s for about 30 years. And what I rely on is my ability to get the job done. When someone says you can consult, when I finish and they look at the work is good. They don't care if you're Black or white, male or female, if the work is good. So I have been able to persevere long enough to have that as my resource. For young doctors who are not in that position, they are gagged, they are bound. And to make an opinion on why don't they speak out, because they can't afford it or there's liabilities. But my HBCUs, I know we got some big thinkers. I know we have some heavy hitters, and I don't understand why the administrative level or the executive level are not more proactive. I know many of the university are state or landowners, but there has to be some heroes. And I know that Howard has the intellect, the laboratory, and the abilities to generate monoclonal antibodies. I know that Tuskegee could, Meharry could. I mean, I can list many of these very strong medically endowed schools that can. I don't know their whys, why they don't. I have no answer. And no one has ever, and I've done this shout out before. And I'm not hard to find. I've had people find me on WhatsApp, they find me on the internet, and I respond when I'm contacted. So why aren't we doing this for ourselves is the question I put back. I'm not waiting for somebody else to give me permission.
Well, this is certainly an issue that I'm willing to take to directly to the president of Howard University, Dr. Wayne Frederick, who's an MD himself. and at least we can get some kind of response as to why this is not taking place.
Well, I'm not just going after my HBCUs. I'm going to give a shout out because it's, I guess in a way, my mother would say that's a backhand compliment. I interacted on another issue with my alma mater, University of Pittsburgh, and I was very pleased to see that a comment that I made on an article written in our magazine was passed all the way up to the vice chancellor. And the vice chancellor wrote a 3-paragraph letter acknowledging, where some of the difficulties I may have experienced at University of Pittsburgh would no longer be tolerated with today's young people. So my shout out and request is not just to my HBCUs. If we have a benevolent, laboratory conscious, fully funded, endowed chair, professor scientist who wants to get busy, please do. Eli Lilly may be a target as well, since they made mention of the pediatrics. Perhaps that is a pharmaceutical company that could be contacted and collaborated with to generate quickly, do warp speed,
Right.
passive immunity generation. But we need some heroes.
RP, the brothers.
Thank you, Dr. Bowles. We have a question from another question. I imagine it's related specifically to COVID-19, and you'll hear. The questioner asked, what is the definition of asymptomatic?
Asymptomatic means you have the virus within. Now, I'm glad you asked it because it relates directly to what we started this conversation with. What do vaccines do? It stimulates your body to give an immune response. An asymptomatic person is what we call a rapid responder. That means when the virus latched in, they didn't take 3 to 7 days to make antibodies. They obviously were able to start protecting itself within 24 to 48 hours. Now, their body is generating protection, but guess what? The virus is still present. So they feel fine, they eat fine, they sleep fine, but the virus is still in their nose, the virus is still in their mouth. So if they go out and do a little party because they feel fine and they give you a kiss on the cheek, or they shake your hand, or you share food and I taste it and I let you taste it, I am spreading the virus despite my not having symptoms. The most famous case, if you're Salmonella Mary, Typhoid Mary. How many of you heard about Typhoid Mary? If you do, again, I always recommend you do some science history. Typhoid Mary was a lady who had Salmonella typhi without symptoms. And it said that she's the reason over 3,000 people died. Mary liked to cook, and she would go cook with the railroad. And because, as you may know, typhoid or Salmonella typhi is shared into food. So if she sneezed, wiped her hand on the apron and reached over and made some bread, everybody who had some bread could get typhoid. So ultimately, now this is what makes me chuckle. Typhoid Mary was arrested by the Public Health Service, and she was incarcerated in it's not a jail. It's kind of like what they did with tuberculosis people. They put them in a sanatorium. So she was placed in a sanatorium to protect the public. Do you know she lived to be 84?
Wow.
There are people who can infect you who have no symptoms of their own.
And they don't get sick either.
Wow.
They don't get sick. It means their body protects the body. But the offending agent is doing very well, growing and spreading while they are perfectly healthy.
Someone asked a question in chat that I think he did ask the question, but you didn't get a chance to answer it. Is any other country offering passive immunity?
I heard that Cuba is the only country I've heard where they are. But see, Cuba's been leading some very progressive actions. Back when COVID first came out in February, they made it compulsory that all medical students, before they would graduate, had to do what they call community service. So they paired the students up 2 at a time, and they went door to door, knocked on your door to come and test you for COVID-19. And this activity was incorporated as part of their medical training. So consequently, they have these army of young people going house to house, testing people in remote parts of Cuba who otherwise may have been missed. So they had a very proactive program early on. And from what I understand, they have a passive immunity program ongoing. But I'm not sure, I haven't heard anything about vaccination going on in Cuba. I think there is an embargo reasserted against them. At one time, it seemed the doors were slung open, and now I'm not sure politically where we stand. But in Cuba, I understand that they do and are administering passive immunities.
Yeah, well, I know Trump just signed some edict this past week in reference to Cuba, and I can't remember if he has labeled them as a terrorist country or something. He's knocked them down again, and whatever it was. But I just heard this just this past week.
Well, I said it because in the beginning, there was a lot of information. I knew Cuba sent an entourage of people to New York City in the early parts of COVID-19. I knew that some of the British people were emulating the Cuban door-to-door evaluation for COVID-19, and suddenly all that information got shut down. So I don't know, I don't follow the politics, but I can tell you from the international health scene, information on Cuba dropped out.
Okay, I guess we've reached the end of our road, or the road, as I can say. Dr. Bowles, I'm telling you, I'm so thankful and so pleased to have you join us today. I mean, the information has been very helpful and educational, and I hope that everyone who has listened will benefit. I don't know how everyone else feels, but if everyone at some point decides they'd like to have you come back, I'd like to, invite you back if that's possible. And one of the things that we forgot to do, we usually always start any activity that we're beginning with a prayer, and we forgot to do that. And so I would like to ask Brother Saladin to do that. But before he does, I want to give a shout out to the person who was very instrumental in helping us to spread the message by designing a very good flyer for us, which I don't think you got a copy of it, but her name is Shelly McKinney, and she's helped us quite a bit in getting this flyer out and getting the message spread that you were going to be with us. And I'd just like to, thank her for being able to do that for us. And she's with an organization called Moms Network USA, and she works with mothers on different issues and programs. So thank you, Shelly, if you're listening. And Saladin, if you could start us with the ending dua, inshallah.
Yes, I will. And again, thank you, Dr. Bowles, for honoring us. I think I speak for all of us. We
Absolutely.
have in the Quran, our holy book, a chapter that's titled "By the Time," and it goes by time. God is swearing by time. Surely humanity is in loss, except those who enjoin truth. Innal insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu, except those who have faith and do good deeds and invite one another to the truth and invite one another to be steadfast in the face of that truth. We say Ameen to that.
ألا بذكرك قلبي يطمئن ألا بذكرك قلبي يطمئن وهل بغير